Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining. And I'm just introducing Ben Kais for our third session of Cultural Apologetics. Hi, people who are watching. And it's very exciting to be able to fulfill a commitment to equip the congregation on how to share our faith in this complex world that we live in. So to launch with cultural apologetics is very, very foundational. And then next week, for a series of 3 evenings, 3 Wednesdays, we're going to talk about the whole intersection of science and the Bible. And so for the first session, we're going to have Dr. Tammy Kim, our own Tammy Kim, and she's going to talk about creation and science. And then we're going to have Donna, I think, the following week, and then me, or vice versa. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do Bible and history archaeology, and whether the material culture coincides with the biblical records, but especially what to do when it doesn't. Do you just abandon the scripture, or do you abandon science? What do you do? So that's where we headed. But for tonight, Ben is back, and so welcome. Thank you so much for doing this for us.
Yeah, my pleasure. So good evening, everybody. I'll try not to kick this water over. I think I'm going to. So yeah, thank you for coming back. This is, I warned you all last week that the third lecture is going to be a little looser, a little bit like the junk drawer in your kitchen, where if things don't belong in any other particular drawer, they just wind up there, and they don't necessarily have a lot in common. They're just the things that didn't go elsewhere. Miscellaneous. Hopefully there's a little bit of sense to this, and I certainly want to leave some time to have a discussion afterwards if people are up for it. But like I did last week, I'm just going to do a very brief kind of reminder of what we talked about in the previous lecture, and which will hopefully sort of get us started towards what we're going to be talking about tonight. And really, the question that I used to sum up everything I'm going to talk about tonight is just, is persuasion possible today? Like, can you persuade people? I want to address apologetics issues, but also apologetics opportunities. And I'll explain more about what I mean by those two things later. But last week we talked about pluralism, which was a basic fact of the modern world. It's a fact that basically just states there's a huge diversity of different religious viewpoints in the world today, rubbing shoulders, as it were, every day. And that's hard to contest. But relativism, in contrast, is a philosophical belief, or a doctrine, really, that attempts to make sense of the pluralism that we see. Welcome, come on in. We're just reviewing last week, so... And so, yeah, relativism is a belief that tries to make sense of the pluralism by claiming that no one belief system is universally true. But any belief can be true for the person who believes it. In other words, what I believe can be true for me, what you believe can be true for you. There's no need to get into conversations about conflicts between beliefs. To have exclusive beliefs, including Christian ones, is, in this context, kind of a heresy. We talked about that last week. If relativism is a doctrine, then exclusive beliefs are the heresy. To question someone else's beliefs or try to persuade them to adopt your own is nonsensical. It doesn't make sense, because beliefs belong in this upper story of subjective preference, right? They believe that's where beliefs belong. They don't belong in the public sphere in which we talk about things that we can taste and touch, and so that's just one of the challenges. We discussed some of the reasons last week why relativism as a philosophy doesn't really hold together. Tolerance, then. So if pluralism is is just looking about and observing a fact, relativism is a doctrine that tries to explain that fact, then tolerance is the ethical teaching built on relativism, and that's that everybody must accept everybody else's beliefs. And to say that someone else's beliefs are false is intolerant, and that's very often in today's climate interpreted as bigoted and hateful and terribly narrow-minded. And we discussed some of the short-sightedness of this as well. Whether or not people actually use these three terms or think about them, they're still at the root of much of what I would call the confusion that we see in our culture. And again, relativism is like the air we breathe. Even us who are actually really not relativistic in our beliefs are still influenced by it and still sometimes can think that way. Relativism is actually just as exclusive as any other religion, any other religious belief. The notion that no one has the truth and all religions are like different paths up the same mountain, this is a complete contradiction of the beliefs of most religious people in the world. It neglects the fact that different faiths have radically different ideas about the character of God. So this idea that you're just all on a trail, different trails going up to the top of a mountain where it's all sort of different ways to the same truth. Well, that's incredibly condescending and disrespectful to every major world religion, actually. And also it neglects the fact that, actually, as a Christian, I don't think I'm worshiping the same God. He doesn't have the same character as the God that a Muslim is worshiping. I just don't think that's true. There are a lot of very, very crucial differences. So by criticizing exclusive beliefs of particular religions as arrogant, relativism is actually behaving just as condescendingly. And by claiming to have this kind of knowledge that it denies everybody else. So only the relativist can see the real truth that all religions are basically just the same. All those poor people down there don't know, but we know because. So those are just a couple of the issues that we identified. Just gonna bump your phone here, Jen. And in addition, when it comes to tolerance, nobody can possibly be as tolerant as relativism requires them to be. This is another thing we talked about. Thankfully, very few people are completely tolerant. This is a good thing. Because there are a lot of things that should not be tolerated in the world. My point was that relativism doesn't provide any grounds for distinguishing what's to be tolerated and what's not. It's no help at all. So, one thing we did not discuss last week, I think, and I think it's important to just talk about this a little bit, briefly. In America today, while the culture has largely left the belief in the Christian God behind, it still relies on the moral foundations that were laid by biblical faith. Morally, there's three goofy illustrations that I feel like that come to mind when I think about this. It's like, gotten rid of God, but we really like sort of this idea that there are moral absolutes in the world. So we're going to just hold on to those, keep on being nice as long as we can, without God being there. It's a little bit like, when you're totally out of gas in the tank and you're running on fumes, that expression of running on fumes. It's like there's still some fumes in the gas tank that are still making that engine fire, but it's not going to last much longer. There's no actual gas in the tank. It's a little bit like demolishing the foundation, but trying to still live on the upper floors of a house. The stupidest metaphor I could think of was Wile E. Coyote running off the cliff, and he's like run off the edge of the cliff. He hasn't started falling yet because he hasn't looked down. But it's a little bit like, morally, that's kind of where our culture is at. The most basic, I think, and far-reaching example of this is the commitment to a belief in human rights. This idea that there are universal human rights, which presupposes the dignity and value of every human person, regardless of how much money they have, regardless of their race, regardless of how old they are, their intelligence, their health, their usefulness to society. The idea of universal human rights assumes that every single person has the same dignity and value. And this is not actually an obvious thing to conclude by looking around us. It comes only because of Genesis 1. That's the only place that belief comes from anywhere in the world, anywhere in the history of religion or thought. Genesis 1 establishes this universal dignity of people based on the image of God. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, it states that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The reason the writers of the Declaration of Independence found it to be self-evident was because they were from a Christian society. It's actually not self-evident at all. Self-evident meaning it just proves itself. You don't have to prove it. It's just obvious. Well, actually, there's nothing obvious about all people being equal, unless you look to Genesis 1 and have that as a foundation that's declared by God. But if you look around you, there's really nothing that would suggest that everybody is equal. People have different intelligences. People have different amounts of money. Some people are nice. Some people are jerks. What is the? It's not self-evident at all, really. It's true, but only true because of what Genesis 1 teaches about God creating men and women in his image. And so the whole foundation of the idea of human rights is founded upon that, and yet we're living in a time when God can be disposed of, but generally people really like the idea of human rights still, right? I'm glad they do. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it's a problem to get rid of the foundation. There's even been some very articulate atheists. There's a guy named Alain de Botton. I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, I don't think, but he's written a lot on what religion for atheists could be. In other words, he's recognizing that religion provides something very, very important for human beings, both socially, in terms of community, and psychologically, and just get rid of the God part. But religion still needs to function for us. And so, this has been, people have commented, this is freeloading off of God. In other words, we don't really want you, but we want all the cool stuff, the good stuff that you provided historically for people. And so it reminds me, very often, and sadly this is sometimes a legitimate criticism, but, Christians are criticized for being hypocritical. You look at another scandal, a Christian leader has done something terrible, and you hear comments like, Christians, they're such hypocrites. They don't live up to their own moral foundations. They say that this is true and then they don't even do it. Tim Keller had an interesting question. He says, what I like to ask is, when talking to someone who's not a Christian, why are you so much more moral than your beliefs require you to be? If you don't have any foundation for moral absolutes at all, why are you so much better than you have to be? I mean, why are you basically a good person? Of course, ultimately people are not good in the fullest sense, but the point is basically the point that I'm trying to make, where our culture still has some notion of what being good and nice and moral is, but without any of the underpinnings, the foundation that provides a framework for any of those claims. So, tonight, that's just kind of some background rambling. We're going to talk about apologetics issues, and then also some areas in which I think there are opportunities, and I think I'd love to hear your thoughts and just your observations as well, because this is not at all comprehensive and is not trying to be comprehensive at all. But what do I mean by apologetics issues? I just mean any contemporary topic of concern that makes the Christian faith implausible or unappealing to non-Christian people. What's a particular hurdle that is part of why someone refuses to believe in the God of the Bible? You could call it a stumbling block. Right? What are stumbling blocks? When we think about how we can best share the gospel with people today, what particular issues need to be addressed currently that make the Christian faith either implausible or just repugnant? It's not always even like someone thinks it's untrue or not even thinking that way necessarily. It's just gross to many people. It's a different kind of, So, the more aware we are of what kind of issues and topics are relevant, I think the better chance we have of communicating well to people. I think one apologetics issue that it's not surprising, none of this is going to be surprising to any of you, but just the overarching issue of politics swallowing up everything. There's hardly anything that isn't now a political issue. 5 years ago, I never would have thought that in a pandemic, whether or not you wear a mask could be an identifier for what party you belong to. There's almost no social issues left where if you voice an opinion, you're not revealing your political loyalties, right? It feels that way. It's not actually true, but that's the impression and it certainly seems to be true some of the time. If you believe this about that one issue, then I know everything else about you. I know all the things you care about. I know all the things that you don't like. I know, and of course, this is happening in a context of polarization. So basically, polarization meaning everybody believes what they believe more and more strongly and is less and less capable to listen to opposing views. And so everyone's backing into corners further and further away from each other. Into this climate, the Christian faith has become, I would say, thoroughly enmeshed in conservative politics. And there's almost a complete identification between Christianity and right-wing priorities. And again, this is not the case for every Christian. This is not the case for lots of people I know, but this is the general sort of tidal wave that has happened in this country, and it's certainly the impression among many of the people that live around here. Certainly, this is a fairly liberal place. The impression given is that evangelicalism and right-wing politics are basically interchangeable, right? But part of this is certainly a result of widespread evangelical support for Trump, to the point of at times being unwilling to criticize anything that he does and says, including those things that are blatantly contradictory to the Christian faith. But if Christianity had any credibility before Trump in liberal circles, it doesn't now.
Yeah.
It's been lost entirely. And it didn't really have much credibility before, actually. So in many Christian circles, this is part of the issue. In many Christian circles, maybe more conservative circles, one's perceived orthodoxy has more to do with their support for Republican causes than it does for any teaching from the Bible. And this is really true in some cases, thankfully not everywhere. Whether we happen to fit that description or not, it's the impression that people have today is that and it makes the Christian faith repulsive and not even worth considering for many, many people. We've spoken to many people at L'Abri over the years, even before the Trump years, but just grown up in Christian homes, but had a lot of problems with their upbringing, maybe their family or the church, and then just part of this is obviously the media, what gets coverage and what doesn't, but the impression that during the Me Too movement, the most vocal evangelicals were defending the or most concerned about the possibility that some men might be falsely accused. And that was like the only thing coming out, rather than a genuine concern for women who've been sexually abused. And that's just enough for some people. Just forget it. This is disgusting. It's just about power. Christian faith is just about power, and I've had enough of it. And so that's really, I have deep sympathy for people who conclude that. I don't think it's the right decision, and I think that we should weep for the fact that for many people that's their only exposure or understanding of what the Christian faith is. Another big one, and I've just said that everything is political, so all these other issues I'm going to mention all have political, they're politically charged. Another big one, I would say, that we're sort of talking through a number of what I would call apologetics issues. Remember, sexual ethics is a huge one. Christianity is viewed as being tyrannically strict about sexual ethics. Ever since the 1960s, I think this has been the impression, maybe before, the 1960s and the sexual revolution. Sexual expression, totally free expression, is viewed as a really important right that people have. Traditional biblical teaching on sexuality seems hopelessly narrow and oppressive. And today, in recent years, well, going back a long time, the most contentious area having to do with this is LGBTQ plus issues in the church. The church is perceived as not only condemning homosexual behavior, but as actively hating gay and trans people, making their lives utterly miserable and driving them away. And in many cases, this criticism is just true. I've spoken to so many people who have experienced this. Many churches that hold a conservative biblical view on homosexuality have a lot to repent of in terms of their treatment of real people. So this is one of the leading reasons why young people of every sexual orientation are walking away from Christianity. If God, and by extension Christians, refuse to affirm me and my friends in my sexual identity, I'll never be a Christian. I never will. So I'm not saying that is a good and right thing to believe and a good reason to walk away from Christianity, but I am saying that we better learn how to engage with that question if this is the reason why people are walking away. This is all very confusing because there's so much of what I'm saying is true and right criticisms of the church sometimes, but some of it isn't, right? And so we just have to be really nuanced in how we address any of this. Another big apologetics issue is the ecological crisis. Christianity is, ever since an article, I think back in the 70s, by a man named Lynn White, it's called the Historical Roots of the Ecological Crisis. And it's this essay that got a lot of traction, a lot of people read, and sort of became part of the liberal doctrine about the view of Christianity and the environment. Basically, because of Genesis and the way in which the Bible teaches that humans are the most important thing on earth, that has been the reason why people have always mistreated the environment and created this crisis we're in now. Not actually a fair assessment. I don't think the article is actually completely accurate, but you look around today, and what are some of the who are some of the people that are least likely to take climate change seriously? It's Christian people, and there's all kinds of reasons why that might be the case. I'm not going to get into that issue particularly, but it's an important one to engage with. We've already talked a little bit about the churches, the perception of the church as being just not a good place for women. Basically fiercely defending patriarchy for generations and generations. The fairly apathetic response of particularly white Christians to racial injustice, questions of racial injustice, is another huge question that people have. On and on and on. It goes, there's so many different issues that are the reasons why people refuse to take Christianity seriously, and it's really overwhelming. It's overwhelming. I feel overwhelmed and confused much of the time. But the overarching theme, one of the overarching themes, is that in the eyes of the average people we run into today, the Christian faith has the low moral ground, or at least is perceived to have the low moral ground on almost every issue, right? Another common thread between all of these things I've just been saying is that objections to the Christian faith, I think, in recent years have. This is not the true in every case, obviously, but there has been a shift from objections being about knowledge, what we can know, how do you know that's true, those kinds of questions, to objections about ethics. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean. L'Abri, where I work, was started back in the 1950s by Francis Schaeffer. He and his wife started this community in Switzerland, and it became very, very busy, a place where many, many people came through to talk about ideas throughout the 60s. Most people had to address questions about epistemology in order to become Christians. Epistemology it's a branch of philosophy. All it means is the question of how we acquire knowledge. How do we know what we know? And so, for instance, the statement, science is the only reliable source of knowledge, that's his claim about epistemology, like how we know something. The statement, which I'm much more comfortable with, is science is the way to know certain things, but God's revelation also provides reliable knowledge. That's also a statement about epistemology. Questions like, is revelation possible? Are the scriptures reliable? Is there necessarily a conflict between science and Christianity? It's awesome that we're going to be dealing with that next week. These kinds of objections are really important. They still exist. They're worth addressing. What I think we see a lot today is not so much that question, but more questions about ethics. Questions that go like this. I could never believe in a God who would condemn unbelievers to hell. Or, I could never believe in a God who says that homosexuality is wrong. Or, I could never believe in a God who's so insecure that he demands worship. There's a song, I like this songwriter, Josh Ritter. He's a great songwriter. He's totally scathingly opposed to Christianity, but he's a very good songwriter. It's really interesting to listen to his kind of goofy, I'm not goofy, he's a good songwriter, but anyway, there's this very sort of stereotypical song about this girl growing up in a small Christian town and being made to go to Bible college and sort of throwing off the shackles of her upbringing and finally living, and there's this great line in it, it's all about sort of like sexual freedom and everything, and it says, what kind of God would keep a girl from getting what she needs? So any question that says, what kind of God would, right? That's an ethical objection. Yeah. It's not an objection about, like, does God exist? Does he not? Is this how do we know what we know? That's a question about God's morality. So it's a big difference. And it's not that, some people have all the questions all at once. It's not as if it's not as if the questions about epistemology are done and over with at all. So it's not the truth or the falsehood about Christian claims that's being considered, really. It's rather the morality of the claims or the perceived lack of morality. People balk at the notion of believing in a God who's less moral than they are, according to their own moral framework, right? How can I believe in a God who's not as good as I am? So how do we approach this? It's on the face of it, it sounds like a really, really audacious claim. Anything that I find unpalatable and offensive is not allowed to exist. That's what it sounds like, right? Wow, that's... if only that were the case, right? But actually, I think someone who thinks about beliefs as something each person gets to construct for themselves based on preferences, rather than on actual knowledge of something true universally, Well, it starts to make a little bit of sense there, because it's what you choose to believe about God is your choice. What I choose to believe about God is my choice. God isn't there. I just refuse to believe in the idea of a God who's a jerk, right? So that this is, it's still an audacious claim, but it makes sense from within itself. I think if you don't believe that God is really there and has revealed himself, then it makes more, this kind of perspective has a little bit more traction. It's less a decision about the existence of God. It's more a question about allegiance. I will not align myself with a God who's so unaccepting and judgmental. So, if God is too immoral to believe in, this is just, it's kind of an obvious question, though, but I think it's one that not as many people think about as you would think. This is one of the things where apologetics is so often about just trying to get people to think about their own beliefs a little harder. It's not even like coming in with guns blazing with the truth. It's just like, what does that mean? Why do you believe that? I mean, because very often people, to be able to say God's immoral, he hates gay people, so forget it, is a pretty easy way to dismiss something without thinking very much. And so much of what we need to do is learn how to ask questions and get people to actually articulate and think a little harder than they're used to thinking about these things. So, where do our, if God is too immoral to believe in, where do our moral absolutes come from in order to make such a claim? On what grounds do you get to decide whether God is moral or not, if you've just kicked the foundation out from under morality itself? How does anybody have the grounds for making such a claim if while making that claim they remove God as the basis for morality, which really I think only God can provide? Everyone wants to make moral statements. We all make moral statements. No matter what someone believes about religion and God, everybody makes moral statements and believes in morality. And everybody wants their moral statements to have weight and authority. If I say, it was wrong that you stole my car, you don't want to hear someone say, well, that's your opinion. No, it was wrong, right? It's objectively wrong. You have to assume there's some authority behind that statement if it's going to mean anything at all, right? But in the absence of God, this is impossible. So basically, you're standing in moral judgment over God, calling him too immoral to exist. And yet, how do you make moral claims? This is a huge area of thinking, and lots, millions of pages have probably been written on this, like the basis for morality without religion. So I'm not going to go into any more detail, but it's a very important question to ask. Another very closely related thread is the question of identity today. Identity, figuring one's personal individual identity out has never been more important than it is now. And it's been important for a long time. But and of course, it's not all bad to think about identity. It's important to know who you are. Each of us have many aspects of our identity that are real and important. You think about different facets of someone's identity. There's racial identity, there's ethnic identity, cultural identity, there's national identity. I'm an American. Vocational identity, sort of how I view my work as being a part of who I am. Relational identity, and I'm a father to my children. I'm a husband to Nikayla. Giftings, I like to think of myself as someone who's good at this, and that's an important part. And then, of course, gender identity and sexual identity. These are all legitimate things, right? They're all aspects of who people are. But we're living in a time in which people, and you could say probably more younger generation, but I'll just say people in general are expected to define the whole of their identity for themselves. up to you. You come up with it. Life, in large part, is all about constructing your identity and expressing it and reconstructing it and expressing it. Who you are is up to you. And your identity is malleable. You're on a totally self-defined journey towards what psychologists have called self-actualization, finding your potential. There's great importance placed on being authentic to yourself. Be authentic. Be the real you. If it's a Disney movie, it'll say follow your heart. In some way or other, following your heart is super important. But no guidance of what that might mean. Redefine yourself and follow the meandering whims of your heart. Be authentic to whatever that moving target is. Right? The result is that nobody knows who they are. A total crisis of identity for so many people. Everyone is scrambling to find something that feels right, that gives them a sense of meaning, of purpose, of belonging, or at least just takes some of the pain away of not knowing who they are. And in the absence of God, it's really bleak. It's really bleak, because nothing will satisfy. And so you have to keep looking, experimenting, reinventing yourself. It's like saying in the middle of a storm, anchor yourself to this leaf here. You'll be safe if you just hold on to this leaf in the ocean. That's what following your heart is. I'm sorry. So anyway, a tremendous amount of identity today and identity politics is built around what offends you. The moral indignation is a huge identifier that people like. I'm someone who hates this kind of person, right? I'm someone who gets angry by this kind of person, and it's reactionary. It doesn't actually have any. It's not really an identity in itself. So, and the reason why none of these sources of identity work is that none of them can define the whole person. No matter how important I think some aspect of myself is. I'm a musician. That's what I am. I am musician, whatever it is. That can't possibly define my whole personhood. None of those things I mentioned a second ago, race, culture, nationality, vocation, none of it goes deep enough. It can't encapsulate all that it is to be a human, and really only the image of God can possibly do that. Race is important, but it's not the essence of who somebody is. The image of God, I think, is a deep comfort. It can be a deep comfort to us in the midst of all this confusion, because I think this is something that it is for me when I feel like I don't know how to communicate to somebody who thinks all this about my faith, But believing in the image of God means that whenever we're talking to somebody, no matter how much they disagree with you, no matter how hostile they are towards your beliefs, you're not talking to an alien. You're talking to another person. You have something fundamental in common with everyone you talk to. The image of God means that they both have dignity, but they also have longings, desires, capacities that you share with them as well. No matter what separates you culturally from somebody else, you both love and want to be loved. You both need your lives to mean something. You both worship something, whether you call it worship or not. So there's these deep commonalities, and this is where a lot of the opportunities lie for actually connecting with people in ways that make sense. Because we're not talking to aliens. We're talking to fellow image bearers. So this is where my talk gets really spotty because I ran out of time. So I'm just going to start talking about a couple things. There's only one page left here, so it's actually might go longer because of that. I might just start blabbing. But some of these terms they may have been used before. Otherwise, I've just sort of made things up. But I'm trying to communicate a couple of ideas here. What are some opportunities? Where are areas in which we can speak plausibly, maybe without unnecessary combativeness? Well, I think there's a lot to be said about the Christian view of what human flourishing is. And a lot of actual, not necessarily common ground, but something like common ground between what is a life well lived and what leads to human flourishing by a Christian definition and then what a secular definition of that is. There's obviously radical differences, but there's some areas that are really interesting and worth thinking about. The whole movement of positive psychology was sort of a departure from Freudian psychology. Freudian psychology sort of focused more on pathologies. So how do we understand something about the human mind? By studying the people whose minds have really gone, are ill. Positive psychology is more interested in studying how do people's minds work who are actually living healthily and are thriving and are competent and are successful. What can we learn from those people in terms of how their minds work? And a lot within that very broad category of positive psychology, there's been a lot of studies in the past 20 years, maybe longer ago, on things like forgiveness. More recently, the practice of gratitude, even humility. What ways do consciously living humbly actually affect you positively, right? I've done more thinking about gratitude than these other two, but it's really interesting because what we see is that people who are totally secular, have no Christian commitment at all, are going through these very, doing these long-term studies, working with people on the difficult task of forgiving someone who's hurt them. And no connection to sort of a higher moral kind of call to forgive. That's not part of it. It's really just what are the psychological benefits of forgiveness for you, the person forgiving. And how does that actually help you to heal in order to forgive? And of course, any Christian person that understands something about forgiveness should not be surprised by this. But lo and behold, people that really strive to forgive others that have hurt them thrive way more than people that refuse to and can't and hold on to their resentment, right? And so you see, in a sense, the way that God made us to live being demonstrated. Human beings do not flourish when they refuse to forgive. They move towards more health and more flourishing when they do. And it's very much the same with gratitude. Contemporary notions of gratitude, again, they're totally divorced from any idea of a person to whom you give thanks. But there is a lot of emphasis on saying thank you to people that have been helpful to you. But actually, a lot of the studies that have been done on gratitude claim that you can improve in almost any measurable way. Socially, you can sleep better, you can be physically healthier, psychologically more at peace by practicing feelings of gratitude without saying thank you to anybody. It's just an internal discipline of reflecting on the things you've received and trying to be grateful. And even that has like huge health benefits for people, literal physical health benefits. And so a lot of times the study stops there. It's just like, well, we've now shown that gratitude works, and it's very much, at its worst, it's very much about, especially if you read pop psychology kind of magazines or whatever, it's about technique and getting results, and you're busy, so you only have time to reflect on gratitude for 5 minutes every morning, but it's amazing what it can do for your day, kind of stuff, in any case, another opportunity to say, well, why? The Christian person has an opportunity to say, well, yes, I'm not denying that gratitude actually leads to a better, more flourishing, healthier life. I wouldn't deny that. But why do you think that is? Does that correspond to anything larger? Does that correspond to any broader reality? Does it matter to you that to be grateful, by your definition, you don't even need to say thank you to anyone? Which, to me, the idea of gratitude, I think there's a lot to be said for, like, gratitude is intrinsically interpersonal. It has to do with the other. You can't be grateful to yourself. It's one of the only emotions you can't be grateful. You can't experience gratitude like by yourself. It implies another who's given you something, right? And yet, in the sort of the very narrow psychological world, it's all about just internal feelings of gratitude. But I feel like that's a good area to kind of push into and talk to people about. Well, what does it matter? Do you wish there was someone there to say thank you to? I have a friend who's a minister. His father was very, very, I think, wealthy, philanthropic, very generous, lovely person, very not into the Christian faith at all. But he would gather his family together every Thanksgiving and raise the glass in the air and say, "To whom it may concern." And in a way, I like that because it's poking fun. It's revealing that, like, I have no idea who we're saying thank you to, but I can't dismiss the feelings of thankfulness, right? That somehow everything I've received is a gift. From who? Like, to whom would I say thank you? To whom would I say that? Anyway, that's, yeah.
Just one thing that I've always found really interesting is that the emoji for thank you is prayer hands.
Yeah.
Like, it is in and of itself a sort of prayer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting. I never thought of that, yeah. I wonder for how much longer.
I know.
Yeah.
May already be gone.
Yeah, check your phone.
We don't have a signal for it. I bicycle ride, and oftentimes cars will stop to let me go. And I wave. I mean, what else can you do?
Yeah.
Are you telling me to stop, or are you waving? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I wish there was something, thumbs up, I guess. Is the
Right.
thing.
Yeah. General positive
Yeah.
feedback. Yeah. So that's just something that's good to be aware of. Like, in what ways is the secular culture kind of stumbling upon the goodness of Christian virtues without acknowledging them as Christian virtues, but they live in the same world that we live in. And lo and behold, if you actively try to live a life of gratitude, you will live a better life. Okay, some of you who were here the first. Oh yeah. Good.
Yeah, so I just have a question. If you don't have a biblical worldview, right, then what is their worldview?
I mean, it could be any number of different things. A lot of what it's kind of what we've been talking about for the past few weeks, honestly. Which I think were you here last week? Yeah. I mean, it's the whole conversation about relativism. That's a worldview. Yeah. And the problem is it's not always an articulated worldview. The person himself might not have thought it through very much. But worldview is basically this may be an old-fashioned way of defining worldview, but worldview is a way in which people sort of answer very important questions, and one of them is like, what exists? What is there in the first place? What's wrong, if anything is wrong, and what has to happen to fix it? Like, what can be done? And so the Christian worldview is very much built on these, the God of the universe is there. His creation is real. It's not an illusion. Sin has broken everything. This is the reason why everything is so twisted and broken as it is. Christ has come to redeem creation. It's just these kind of major big questions. And every worldview attempts to answer those questions in one way or another. So I think that a lot of this, what I said a minute ago about asking questions and trying to get people to articulate what, people may not have a thought-out worldview, and yet they have some sort of functional worldview. you know, they get by. They get by each day without jumping off a cliff, you know? So whether it's just, it's important to be a good person, try your best, nobody's perfect, you know, honestly. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why it's important to actually get to know an individual person and actually ask them questions and try to learn something particular about them, because it's not, we can't assume anything. I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah. Another area of opportunity, and this is really trying to finding the commonality between you and this other person. I need my life to have meaning. This person needs their life to have meaning, even if they're looking for meaning in all kinds of ways that I don't think are fruitful or possible. The illustration I used at the very beginning of my first talk 3 weeks ago about this girl in high school, and I was telling her about God, and she said, "Well, sailing works just fine for me." This is it's sort of a description of idolatry in a sense, because what idols are. So a person needs to worship something and needs to find meaning, needs their life to mean something. In a Christian understanding, and I think actually, you know, when you talk about meaning or purpose for something, it has to do with why it was made. What is its purpose? When we talk about meaning. So when you say a watch, the meaning of a watch, it seems like a weird thing to say, but the meaning of a watch has to do with its purpose, right? So the meaning of the watch, in a sense, is to tell time. That's why it was made. That's what it's designed to do. If I use this watch to hammer in a nail, I am misusing it in a sense. It's not what it was made for. It's experiencing a crisis of meaning. My dad always likes to say, you take a sports car and park it in the woods, and just leave it there. You know, that is not reaching its full potential of meaning, right? And the reason it has meaning is because someone, it's not something, but someone has given it meaning. In other words, the person that made it is the one that provides that meaning. And human beings provide meaning to all kinds of different objects all the time, because we are, in a sense, higher than our possessions. This, you know, my pocket knife has meaning to me because I am a meaning giver. I'm a person, and this is an object that serves a purpose in my life. I project meaning onto it, right? The question then is, when we talk about meaning of life, what are we even talking about? Does the same dynamic function there? If my life has meaning, I would say it still needs someone above me to give me meaning, and that person has to be the one who has made me and has a purpose for me. And ultimately, that's, I think, where the longing for meaning comes from. To be connected with the one who's made you and knows why they made you and it has a purpose for your existence. What idolatry does is take something within God's creation that's not even as significant. It's not as significant as God, certainly, but it's not even as significant as you as an image bearer. My phone. My phone is not as significant as I am. I'm made in the image of God. My phone is not. But to make an idol out of my phone is to take something that I give meaning to and then take it and pretend as if it can give me meaning from above.
This is getting too convicting.
What, the phone?
Yeah.
I could have been anything. My phone was just right here. Yeah. But it's trying to take something that you have control over, that you've given meaning to, and then act as if that can give your life a sense of meaning. And that's what sailing was for this girl.
Yeah.
Sailing is something that was invented by people. It's not even as important as you are as a person. And yet, you love it, which is great, it's fine. And you want that thing that you've given meaning to now give you meaning, as if from above, as if it was God, and it's not. And this is why the search for meaning apart from God is fruitless. It doesn't go anywhere.
I think,
Yeah.
I was just, like, when you were talking about all the different kinds of identities, like, I feel like if you're not in a faith believing in the meaning giver
Yeah.
to your life, cling really tightly to those identities
Yeah.
because you're wanting that meaning.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's a desperate thing, I think, because to not have meaning and to know you don't have meaning is deeply painful, and actually is probably the reason why most people commit suicide who do.
Yeah.
Is to have that to be confronted with this thing. Well, there's nothing. There's nothing that gives me significance. There's no reason for me at all. And my life has, that's for a human being. That's sort of ultimate despair. And this is why whenever we talk about suicide levels going up and down, there's obviously all kinds of individual things you could name as problems, and but it's not. It's not. You're not wrong if you say it's a crisis of meaning. Probably on some, even if it's manifesting itself as different things, drug use, maybe all kinds of gender identity questions, whatever it is. So much of the confusion that we get into as human beings is because we're looking for meaning and don't know where to find it, and yet it's so important that it has to be. Yeah, you hold really hard to something. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I was just thinking, just a thought that came to mind is if you rewind like 3-4 minutes about giving meaning, summarizing your discussion or discussion about non-believers with non-believers, seems very much that you try to give meaning to God. What is the meaning of God in my life? Well, he hates gay people, so I have no purpose for him. He hates whatever. He created all these wars. There's no purpose for me. But that also means that in that mindset, God must be man-made, which totally fits there everywhere, I think.
Right.
But also, I'm higher than God. Period. Because I give God meaning rather than God gives me meaning.
Right.
And I think that I'm not sure how that influences any interaction, but whether that makes any sense. But
Yeah.
it does mean that you do have to put God on a higher plan very explicitly.
Yeah. Yeah. That actually, no, we're not the one that give. We're not the ones that give him anything. Actually, he's the one that gives us meaning. Yeah, that's true. But you're right. I mean, that's. It goes back to this, what we talked about the very first week, which is just the assumption that religion is a man-made thing. Religion is something that early societies invented to construct to help early societies cope with a feeling that the universe was meaningless, maybe. We need to project some idea of a personhood onto the sky, and so that we don't feel alone in the universe. And so a lot of people would say that that's what religion is. In which case, well, now we know better. We know we don't need that, and so we can dispose of this sort of invention. And this is the thing that a lot of philosophers would say when you ask about the meaning of life, a lot of people would laugh at you in terms of that's just a category mistake. That's not, that's like saying Wednesday is yellow. It doesn't make any sense. Meaning has to do with the things that we create as human beings, but the meaning of life is just like a pipe dream. Like, good luck. That's not even something to even worry about. And yet, everybody wants their life to have meaning. It doesn't go away. Even if people laugh at the idea, it doesn't go away. So yeah. Let's say one or two more things, and then we can just open it up. So much of what I'm describing, or what I think is necessary for good apologetics to happen, is just it's not even. Almost doesn't even sound like apologetics. It's more just like a shape of life that we should be living as Christians. It's totally connected to just what being faithful in God's world is. Anyway, I think embracing the whole breadth of concerns that the Bible tells us to care about is only a good thing. So, caring about racial injustice, caring about poverty, caring about stewardship of the environment, which we can call creation because we believe there's a creator. These kinds of concerns are biblical. Christians are called to be stewards of the world that God made, as an example. But if we actually are active in pursuing care for creation, say, we will be working alongside people that completely disagree with us in our faith, and yet we will be, it's what Francis Schaeffer called co-belligerent. You'll be a co-belligerent with somebody else. It's not the same thing as an ally. An ally means you agree with somebody about everything, and you're like on their side in every sense. A co-belligerent is, I disagree with you maybe about almost everything, but when it comes to this issue, because I'm a Christian, I'm going to join forces with you on this issue, and I'm going to work as hard as I can with you, alongside you. And that does a couple of things. It's, first of all, it's just obedience to God. It's caring and actually doing things that we're supposed to be doing as Christians. It also goes a long way to deconstruct stereotypes of who Christians are. I think it goes a long way to make the beliefs that I have plausible if I'm actually doing something alongside somebody else. And this is the thing, if you engage very much with secular environmentalists, people that really care about where the world is going and climate change and everything that's happening, it's a community full of a lot of passion and a lot of despair. And Christian people that actually care for the creation and actually take seriously God's call to be stewards of creation, they have a couple different advantages in that world. They have a foundation for what they're doing. It's not just fear of the world ending and everything going to, everything massive ecological crisis. This is an act of obedience to the God who made it. And I'm called to do this. So there's a spiritual foundation motivating us if we actually care about these things. And also there's hope. there's a hope that secular environmentalists don't have and can never have. That actually, no matter what happens, the Lord is going to return and renew his creation. It's going to be a new creation. And so we can serve him, even in really challenging ways, but without this sense of desperation that it's up to us. We need to somehow convince everybody that there's a problem and that I can understand the despair. And so there's a lot to be said for and not everybody can do everything, obviously, but what are some things that God is calling you to do as a Christian that aren't typically religious activities, but are areas of obedience that you're called to that will bring you alongside people that care about the same things? And that's what it is to be a co-belligerent. And we need to not be so squeamish about I don't want to spend time with people. No. Get in there. And I'll just say one more thing about identity, and I think and then I'll end. One of the problems with all these different kinds of identity I talked about that are, I think it's that they may be very important, but not, like I said, none of them go all the way down. None of them are as central and as foundational as the image of God. And yet, the world is full of people trying to make an aspect of their identity into the whole, right? And that's one of the things that's most challenging, I think, today. I think just as an example, if we talk about sexual identity, in the minds of a lot of people today, your sexual identity is your whole identity. And what that means is that if someone comes along and disagrees with your sexual ethic, they hate you to the core because you are your sexual identity, right? That's the sum total of who you are. And so Christian theology is really important here, or Christian anthropology, Christian understanding of what a person is really important, because we uniquely can say, actually, you are too important, have too much dignity and value to be defined by this one thing. And I believe you actually have way more dignity than even you think you have, because I believe you're made in the image of God. And I don't know exactly how to communicate this other than to, in costly and tangible ways, love people. Because I think in a lot of people's minds, there's this little cliche ringing in their ears that like Christians say, love the sinner, hate the sin, right? Hate the sin, love the sinner. And why that, I'm sure, is an obnoxious thing to hear from people. There still has to be, we still have to distinguish between those two things. This person's choices and their sexual ethic and how they view their identity is one thing. It is not their essence. It is not their whole being. And so as a Christian, I want to say, I actually can love you and disagree with, with your sexual ethic. And those two things are not the same. But I can only say that if I really believe in the image of God. And the problem is how it's received. You know, and the problem with love the sinner, hate the sin, is that very often that's said and then not demonstrated at all in any way. And so that leads me to my last thing, which is just so many of these issues in which Christians are on the low moral ground. It's almost like when someone's really hurt you badly, and then they want to be your friend again. It's like there's some trust that has to be regained, right? You need to. And I feel like that is the position we're in, whether we like it or not, as Christians. Whether someone's stereotype of us is fair or not fair, in any case, they don't trust us. Right? They don't trust our motivations. They don't trust what we believe. And this is where I think that just these basic, very, very human call that the Bible gives us to hospitality is so important. In terms of really working on relationships and friendships with people that communicate that we actually love them in a way that is actually believable and isn't just words, is really, really crucial. So that when an opportunity comes to actually talk more explicitly about what we believe and they believe, it's done in the context of a trusting friendship. And it's not just a one-off conversation that makes them run the other direction. It's something that actually is, and I feel more and more that, and obviously God can do anything. You know, I made a quip about the elevator evangelism, which I probably shouldn't have made. The Holy Spirit is capable of doing amazing things, but my sense is that more and more people coming to faith is going to be the result of long-term relationships with Christians who are faithful, who love them and demonstrate that love, not just by saying, I love you, but I hate what you do. But by having people into our homes, by learning how to ask questions, by not treating them like a project or a task, but working on growing in the virtue of curiosity, genuine curiosity. I really want to know what this person, the people that I think are the best at communicating across differences are people that are naturally curious about people. Like what about what happened in your story to make you think, like, how'd you get there? If it's genuine, it's just so much easier, right? And so, but we can grow in that. We can grow in being genuinely curious about our neighbors. I think I'm probably just going to stop there, and then we can. It's because it's almost out of time anyway. Any other questions or things people want to raise? Yeah.
A very basic question. When you say Christians are low moral ground, what do you mean by that? Do you mean other people view Christians that they what do exactly what you mean?
What you just said, whether it's true or not, people view Christians as having the low moral ground on so many important issues. Say if it's like, like the sexual identity stuff, or like how the church has treated gay people. Non-Christians look at the church and say they are less moral than us because of how cruel and rejecting they've been to other, that kind of thing. And even the problem is sometimes the church actually is on low moral ground if the church has really made mistakes and really been, really not honored God. Other times we're perceived as having being on the low moral ground when we really aren't, but people just disagree with us. That I don't know if that's
Yes,
clear.
that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I think part of the problem is that morality is relative, right?
Yeah.
Like truth. I mean,
Yeah.
we see truth as being absolute,
Mm-hmm.
and we see morality as being absolute. The world does not. They
Yeah.
think morality is different for every person, and you
Mhm.
invent your own morality.
Mm-hmm.
So what's moral for one person isn't necessarily moral for another.
Mhm.
So you can make yourself more moral than everybody else if you take some platitude that you think is a platitude,
Mhm.
and you can just make it up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then everybody else has a lower level of morality.
Yeah. Another way, I mean, this gets very controversial, but one of the sources of identity that many people have today is in their victimhood. Victimhood is a huge aspect of identity. I've been hurt by or whatever the source of the victimhood is. One of the reasons why that's appealing, I think, is that if you're the victim, you always have the high moral ground. You're never the one who's to blame.
And no one can
And this-
understand you.
Yeah. But even if it means that I am part of a community of one, I still have the high moral ground. Nobody has suffered in exactly the way that I have. But
So the indulgence in that by them as well as by society, I think that is pure evil. The fact that we allow people to victimize themselves. We all go through that, and people have been legitimately victimized. But,
yeah,
but if you allow people to believe that identifies them completely,
Yeah.
you also take away all their agency.
yeah,
So
that's
they're-
true. Yep,
They're completely helpless
Yeah.
and stuck in that position.
yeah,
So even if it's not necessarily your own, let's say your own fault, or like
Sure,
you're actually a victim of something,
hmm
it still makes sense to get out of that.
yeah.
And
That's very true. And please don't hear that I'm saying that that people who've been victimized are just sort of like making it up or overreacting. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that to have that be what defines your identity is the problem. Yeah, and yeah.
Yeah, and it masks what's dangerous. It masks true cases of aggression. When everything is microaggression, it just completely creates a huge fog. You can't get through. No, this is a real aggression that needs to be addressed.
It's like the use of the word trauma. The way the word trauma has been, I think, just become so widespread. The danger in that is that it ends up trivializing really traumatic things.
Yeah.
It can, if you refer to everything as trauma. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I failed my Spanish test. So traumatized.
Yeah. Everybody's on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Everybody's on the
Yeah.
spectrum, and then you miss people who are really on the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm not a psychiatrist. It's experience.
Yeah.
I think just a comment about, I think one of the ways that, at least in my experience, when people set up this, whether real or perceived evil Christian person, right? I say, what's driving this? What's behind this taking a cheap shot at
Yeah.
Christians who,
Yeah.
whether they've done wrong or not, right?
Right.
It's almost like irrelevant because I'm talking to you
Yeah.
and you're talking to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that guilt by association, I try to you know, I guess for me it's personal because every time I would go home, depending on who's president of the United States,
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
friend of the family or I'm an evil person.
Yeah,
And I'm like, hello, I live with 330 million other people here.
yeah.
And you can't make me guilty for whatever the president has done or
Right.
not done, right?
How could you have let the president do that, Tom?
Yeah,
Surely you have total authority in your country.
but it's this, that's
Yeah.
what we have in our relational apologetic, kind of what you're talking about, making friends with. You have to get behind that and say, let's talk, you and I, we talk about things.
Which means there needs to be a restoration of face-to-face conversations. Everything I've been saying is like, don't do any of it online. It's such a bad idea. Yeah, the way social media functions is to push us further and further into our polarization, and it removes this. We have moral distance. We can say things we would never say to someone's face if we feel that they're far away. And so, yeah, face-to-face conversation with a real person. Why do you think that? Yeah, I'm curious. What is it? And maybe someone has absolutely no, you know, at L'Abri, many people come to L'Abri who, people don't use this term as much, I guess, in the last few years, but you know, I've been burned by the church. I've been burned. And some people really have.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no
Yeah.
sense in denying that. And some people just want to say that because they want an easy reason to walk away. I'm sick of this. I don't feel like this. So, they're so oppressive. I've been burned, and it's just a total smokescreen that isn't really genuine. It's just sort of lazy. And I think, but we don't know unless we actually talk to somebody and be like, why do you feel burned? What happened? You know, and yeah.
Our son calls it church drama.
Church drama.
If I say something or share something, he'll say, "Oh no, more church drama."
Even if it's not drama, it'll just
No,
drama.
It's not really drama.
You call that drama?
There's no stage. There are no actors and actresses involved. And just that's his go-to phrase. I mean, easy to say that and then dismiss what else is really relevant.
Yeah. And not everybody's in a position to get to that conversation.
No.
Sometimes we want to go deeper in with somebody, and they're like, "Actually, I was perfectly comfortable dismissing the Christian faith cheaply, and I don't really want to, you know." And so,
Yeah.
you can't reach everybody. Yeah.
I think a lot of it is justification. People know they're probably not aligned with what's right, but they want to perpetuate whatever it is they're doing because they're enjoying it. And so if you can write everything else off, then you justify your position and you're okay. And as soon as you do anything else, you put a crack in the foundation and it's like, oh, man, I got to look at this.
To rethink everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it's just the smoke and mirrors is very intentional
Mm-hmm.
to justify
Yeah.
what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's important to think. I mean, if you're talking to someone who is truly secular in their thinking, what we're hoping and praying that happens to them is pretty radical, like in terms of a change of perspective on everything in their whole life and submitting themselves to a God who made what we're asking people to consider is drastic, right?
Well, I think for
Yeah.
the American, it goes against what freedom is, right?
Yeah.
And that's the opposite of freedom. That's the opposite of what our country's about, right?
Yeah.
From that perspective.
Yep. Yep. Tim Keller has a great thing about freedom. I love it. Tim Keller has some great, obviously wonderful insights, but he talked about the notion of freedom that we have today is that it's just completely unfettered. Freedom means nothing, no limitations at all. That's what the culture thinks about freedom. And it's like, that is never actually how freedom works in real life. Like, freedom always has parameters. It's like parameters within which freedom can be enjoyed. So it's like his analogy, I think, was like, it's like It's like taking a fish out of water, putting it on the beach, and being, look how free that fish is. It could go anywhere. You know, you're like, actually, no. It's gonna die, because it's only in water that a fish has any freedom at all, right? It's within a creational boundary that a fish can experience the freedom that is available to a fish. Swimming, you know, you take it out of the water, shake off the shackles of aquatic life, and it's gonna die. And to me, that's just sort of a powerful image. I'm like, free. And in Christian terms, freedom is to be had in living in the way that God has made us to be, which has to do with worshiping Him. And
And that the more the shackles are off, the more anxiety, the more depression, the more all of those pathologies
Yeah.
actually come in.
Yeah.
Brandon at some point wants to write a paper on, it's like, true freedom is only under authority.
Yeah.
Some of his patients have the most everything, the most money, the most this, the most that. They can't get out of bed. They can't
Yeah.
do anything.
Yeah.
They can't get a job.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an analogy for me in art making too. It's not too trivial, but like, if you have the best, some of the best art is made in severely limited context.
Like a sonnet.
Yeah. This idea of sort of unfettered freedom. If I had all the money in the world and the biggest recording studio and all the instruments, I would just get so much done. No, actually, it would be the opposite. I would be utterly paralyzed, and the only times in my own life that have been truly productive, it's when there's been quite strict limitations on what I can do, and then it's within that something actually interesting comes about.
Very true.
I think one of the most enduring images of what we're trying to do here is the Father and the prodigal Son. It's Yahweh in chapter 1 of Isaiah. It's like, okay, you have that freedom, you rebelled against me, how is that working in your life? And rather than judge them as they go berserk, wait for them to come back. I think that's the hospitality. You can't really speak in a person in full-fledged rebellion. They're not going to hear anything.
Yeah.
But just give it some time. You know, the cities are burning with fire. How is that working in your life? In chapter 1, you're bleeding to death on the field of battle. Come, let's reason together. And the prodigal son, same thing, right? He burns himself out. Let them. I know it's hard, right? With maybe children we have, let them work through all of that. And then we'll be there. We'll catch them.
It's like when you said, love the sinner and not the sin. I think it goes really, you have to do that, like genuinely let them feel that they're loved. And then you tell them, really I do not approve, as we tell our son and daughter every day, I love you, but I don't love the things you do. And that's why.
And there's a difference.
You get hurt.
Yeah. No,
and
exactly.
they have to feel that to believe in you, to still keep that relationship. Like
They have to experience it for themselves. You know,
Yes.
something,
like
lot of times.
evangelize on the streets, and they're gay people. I talk, in the eye and let them feel that I do love them, but we disagree, and this is what Bible says. So that at least we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
It's not like everybody's ready to hear you.
Yeah.
That if constantly Christian present themselves as genuine, and it may sometimes work out. Like you pray for them, and there will be somebody out there or another chance they can be saved.
Yeah. I think that's right.
And I appreciate your talk.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good things to think about.
Thank you.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Like the more we want to grow closer to God, the more exclusionary it kind of wants to make us, and the more right we think we are. And a lot of churches go that way, and so they become less open, less approachable. And then like the Universalist church is like, all are welcome, all are open, as long as you don't have any strict belief. But
Right.
it's like becoming closer to God and loving God more, while at the same time not thinking we're ever any better because of our love for God.
Yeah.
Which is really hard to do.
Yeah. That's true. To be convicted, to be more, and this is something I didn't talk about at all, but the world's definition of humility and then our definition of humility are two quite different things. And I think in the world, particularly in the context of relativism, humility is to not have any strong convictions about your beliefs. Is to be like, well, this is for me. Could be wrong. Maybe you're right. You know, to not. Whereas Christian humility is actually in response to very specific convictions. Like it is appropriate to be humble because I am not God and I believe that God is God and I'm a creature, I'm limited and I'm sinful, and it's, you have to have certain convictions quite strongly to be humble by Christian standards, right?
Yeah, like I'm a complete mess.
Yeah, and the more convicted I am that the Christian teachings are true, I should be becoming more humble. I should be becoming more humble, right? Because the very essence of the gospel is our failure to please God in our own, on our own. And so, yeah, conviction and humility are not at odds with each other within the Christian life, where I think they are in sort of a secular understanding. Yeah. Maybe I'll end there.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.